I saved 4 years to buy this house, then my brother claimed. It belongs to the whole family. But my proof silenced them all. If a stranger had walked past my porch that morning, they would have seen nothing unusual. A woman in her 60s, standing at a kitchen counter, unwrapping plates one by one, setting them into a cabinet that still smelled faintly of varnish. The windows were open to Ashford Bay, tide moving in, then out, gulls drifting like scraps of paper in a lazy wind. It looked ordinary. It was not. I had been in the house 3 days. The paint was so fresh that the scent still clung to the hall like a memory you cannot shake. Sunlight pushed across the floorboards in quiet lanes, another kind of reminder. This was not borrowed light. It belonged to these rooms, and, for the first time in my life, to me, I ran a sponge over the countertops and felt the shallow, perfect imperfections in the stone, grooves that would be invisible to anyone else, but were as clear to me as the lines on my own palm. I had chosen this slab. I had measured the corners with a tape I bought myself. I had signed the papers with a hand that did not tremble. The deed sat in a neat folder in the top drawer by the refrigerator, and sometimes, when I poured coffee, I opened the drawer just to see my name again, not because I doubted it, but because ownership is a language I learned late and wanted to keep practicing. People like to say the American dream is a 2-car garage and a lawn that drinks too much water. They are wrong. The dream is a door that locks from the inside and a set of keys that do not come with conditions. The dream is silence when you want it and voices only when you invite them. The dream is a house where you are not a guest. I know something about being a guest. I was the second shadow in my late husband's apartment, the person who learned how to navigate someone else's routines as if they were laws. When he died, the rooms threw an echo I could not bear, so I folded my life into labeled tubs and moved into my daughter's basement. I told myself it was temporary. Basement years have a way of pretending they are short. I learned the sound of footsteps overhead. I learned what it means when your window is near the dryer vent and the air arrives already used. On the morning my movers turned onto Ashford Bay Road, I stood in the driveway with the deed pressed between my palms and counted the waves until the truck stopped. A retired teacher will always count things. It is one of the few habits that outlives the bell. I taught children to count to 10. No one ever taught me to count on anyone, so I counted hours, shifts, paychecks, coupons, years. I counted the small humiliations, too. Every yes I said when I meant no. Every time I was told, let it go, we are family. Every time I swallowed it and did that. It took me 4.5 years to save the down payment and another year to find the house that felt like a promise I could keep. The cottage is not large. It sits a little back from the road and a little forward of the dunes. The cedars lean into the wind and creak in the dark. The porch boards give a soft complaint under your weight, as if saying, where have you been? The rooms are simple and bright. There is a spare room for my books, a kitchen that faces the water, a bedroom with a window that wakes before I do. The first night I slept here, I woke at 2 a.m. and walked from room to room with my hand sliding along the wall like a blind woman memorizing a face. This is mine, I said, and the house did not argue. I am not foolish. A house is a structure, not a shield, but sometimes structure is the very shape of safety. Boundaries are like beams. They hold the roof in place. When you grow up in a family that mistakes access for love, you learn the difference late, if at all. I learned it by inches. My older brother learned something else. That is for later. On day 3, I unpacked the last kitchen box and lined up 6 cereal bowls, like a choir at attention. I wiped the shelf twice, not because it was dirty, but because it felt good to do something that made a visible difference. The kettle clicked. Steam braided into the air. I brought the mug to the sliding doors and stood with the ocean tideline stitched across my view. The world moved in a rhythm that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with time. The bay does not care who holds a deed. It does not need to. It knows the difference between storm and quiet. It knows both return. I thought about first lessons, the sort no curriculum lists. The day you realize being polite does not protect you. The hour you decide that keeping peace at the cost of your dignity is not peace. The moment you recognize the tone in someone's voice that says you don't mind, do you, and how your spine remembers being 12 years old. I thought of my mother's old refrain, let your brother lead, and how that sentence built a hallway I spent a lifetime walking down. I had intended to keep the first week to myself. No visitors, no tours, no cheerful before and after photos for people who had not scraped the paint off their hands to get here. I planned to learn the light in each room and the way the wind changes at noon. To sit on the porch with the good pen and write down the things a person forgets when life is mostly other people's schedules. What it feels like to own a quiet afternoon. What it sounds like when a house breathes. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the beach a dog barked, then lost interest. A gull landed on the railing and considered me with the flat patience of its kind. I laughed, a low, surprised sound, and the bird tilted its head as if I had told a joke it almost understood. I reached for my phone to check the time. It lay face down on the counter beside the drawer with the D. I touched the drawer handle. Again. Not a ritual, a reminder. The mug warmed my fingers. The ocean offered its simple sentence. In and out. In and out. I told myself the same thing. Breathe in, breathe out, let the old house go, let the basement air go, let the habit of apologizing for existing go. This is your kitchen, this is your porch, this is your name, printed in black ink thick enough to touch. You learn strange things about yourself when you finally step into a space that answers back. I learned that I prefer the sound of a single spoon in a single sink to a chorus of cutlery clattering at once. I learned that I do not want to fill my rooms to prove I am not alone. I learned that loneliness and solitude are not cousins. They barely speak. Solitude is a door you close. Loneliness is a door that will not open. I carried the empty box to the garage and flattened it with my foot. The cardboard creased and gave. The sound was satisfying. I stacked the flattened boxes in a neat pile, as if by order I could keep chaos at the street. When I came back inside, the kettle had cooled. The light had shifted, and a small wind had sprung up that tapped the screen gently in that private language. Old houses speak to the weather. 3 days is long enough for a house to begin to show you its habits. At 11, the sun lands on the far end of the kitchen table and hangs there like a medal. At noon, the tide smells stronger. At 2, a truck rattles past and someone down the street curses the way old men do, as if the road betrayed them. By 4. The shadow of the cedar touches the front step. By dusk, the porch is a theater seat and the horizon is the play. I thought I had time, a week, at least, time to learn these rhythms and decide where the maps would go, which drawer would be for the rubber bands, and which for the batteries. Whether the porch chair faced due east or preferred a degree or to south. Time to take pictures and send them to the few people who wished me well, without calculating what they might get from it. I placed my mug in the sink and let the last brown line of coffee slip away with the water. The kitchen felt tidy in the way an empty page does. I dried my hands on a new towel that had not yet learned to be thin. I took one more step to the glass, because some views ask to be seen twice. The bay offered another slow breath. I took it. The phone began to ring. The phone's sharp chime cut across the calm like a blade. For a moment I thought it might be a wrong number, or perhaps my daughter checking in. But when I turned the screen over and saw the name, my hand tightened around the glass. Daniel, my brother. I hadn't heard his voice in months. Not since the funeral of an uncle, where he took over the eulogies as though the man had been his shadow alone. Daniel had always been like that firstborn, first voice, first to claim whatever belonged to us both. I had told myself the silence since then was a gift. Now it was broken. I pressed accept. Clara, he said, brisk. Already in the middle of something. Good news. We're heading your way. About 3 hours out. I've got Janice, the kids, some cousins, and a few of their friends. 20, maybe 22 in total. Your new place is right on the bay, isn't it perfect? Plenty of space. My pulse stumbled. Excuse me. Don't panic, Daniel continued, his tone the same one he used when we were children and he ordered me to share my toys. We'll bring a few things. Chairs, coolers. But you've got the bedrooms covered, right? And it would help if you could get some food started before we arrive. Oh, and the master. Put fresh sheets on that. Janice and I will take it. You'll be fine in one of the smaller rooms. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the name on the screen, as if it belonged to a stranger. But the voice was my brother's, steady and certain. Daniel didn't ask. He never did. Daniel, I said slowly, each word like a stone on my tongue. I just moved in. The boxers aren't even perfect timing then. He cut me off, cheerful. This way, we can break the place in together. Family needs family, Clara, especially now. Don't tell me you want to rattle around in that house alone like some hermit. It'll be fun. Fun. That word landed like a blow. Fun was what he called it when he turned birthdays into contests, when he told our mother my science fair ribbon was his idea, when he once drove my car without asking and returned it with an empty tank. His fun was always my loss. I tried again. This isn't a rental. This is my home. On the other end, I heard muffled laughter, his wife perhaps, or one of the cousins. Daniel chuckled and said, "Don't be so dramatic. It's just family. You've got room. You always said you wanted everyone around. Consider it a housewarming." He had already reframed it. My space, my decision, twisted into his narrative. That was his specialty. Daniel didn't just enter rooms, he rewrote them. I opened my mouth to protest, but the line was already filled with his voice giving directions to someone else. Yes, toss that in the trunk. Clara's got towels. She sorted out, then, back to me. All right, sis, we'll be there before dinner. Don't stress, you'll sidle be, just like the old days. And then the click. The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen, mug cooling in my hand, staring at the silent phone. My breath came shallow. The bay outside still rolled in steady rhythm, but inside, everything lurched. 3 days, that was all the peace I'd had. 3 days before Daniel decided my house was his stage, my silence, his permission, my life and annex of his dot. I set the mug down and pressed my palms flat against the counter. The granite was cool, unyielding. I whispered to myself, not again, because I knew what was coming. Engines on the gravel, doors slamming, voices echoing through rooms not built for them, and at the center of it, Daniel, carving his throne. Out of my sacrifice, the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. My reflection in the sliding glass door looked back at me, smaller than the house, smaller than the ocean, but steadier than I remembered being. If he was bringing an army, I thought, I would need more than anger. I would need clarity. I would need proof. Outside, a gull cried, sharp and cutting. It sounded almost like a warning, and as I turned from the window, the quiet of my house shifted into something else entirely. A waiting battlefield. The sound reached me before the sight did. Gravel grinding under heavy tires, a low rumble that didn't belong on my quiet stretch of Ashford Bay. I stepped to the window, mug in hand, and saw the first SUV crawl down the drive like a predator scenting territory. Behind it came another, then 2 more, each packed full, metal beasts lumbering in procession. Doors flung open, voices burst out, children poured into the yard, dragging coolers, inflatable toys, bags that spilled onto the porch before I could even move. One boy tripped, laughed, and left his soda can rolling across my steps. A woman I barely recognized leaned out the passenger side and shouted, "This place is perfect. Thanks for letting us use it." Use it. The words landed sharp. A verdict passed without trial. I opened the door, forcing a smile that never touched my chest. "Welcome," I said, though the words scraped my throat raw. They didn't notice. Neil emerged then, grinning wide, arms spread as though he'd just returned home from war. "Didn't I tell you? Perfect spot. We'll make it lively." Wanted to say lively wasn't the reason I chose this cottage. I wanted to say silence is what I paid for. Instead, I stood still, watching them flood through the doorway like water through cracks. The invasion was swift and casual. Teenagers raced upstairs, arguing about which bedroom had the better view. Someone hauled a cooler straight into my kitchen and dumped it on the counter, nudging aside the bowls I had so carefully lined up yesterday. A toddler's sticky hand slid down the hallway wall, leaving a trail of sugar. I saw it all in pieces. One cousin pulling towels from the cabinet without asking, another balancing on a chair to adjust the ceiling fan. A man I didn't know opening my refrigerator, frowning. "Not much food in here. You'll need to stock up if this is going to work." Work, as if this house had suddenly become a business. Venture and I, the unpaid staff. Daniel clapped his hands like a conductor. "Shoes off. People, leave them by the door. Don't worry about the mess. Clara will clean it up later." Laughter rippled through the room, sharp as broken glass. I carried a pile of flip-flops to the corner, each step deliberate, refusing to let my hands shake. They thought my silence meant surrender. They thought I had already accepted my role. One aunt lifted the keys from the hook by the door, jingling them as though they were a prize. She tucked them into her purse. "I'll keep these safe," she said brightly. I stared at her, not at the purse, not at her hand, but at the audacity. A key isn't just a piece of metal. It's ownership. It's the line between respect and trespass, and in a single careless motion, she had pocketed it as if it were a souvenir. No one noticed the way I whispered under my breath. You didn't just take a key, you took the boundary. By late afternoon, the house no longer resembled mine. Suitcases lined the walls. Voices bounced from ceiling to floor. Laughter colliding with complaints. Demands shouted from room to room. The air smelled of damp swimsuits, fast food wrappers, and something else: disrespect, a stench no candle could cover. From the porch, I caught sight of my neighbor, Mrs. Evans, walking her dog. She slowed when she saw the crowd spilling across my lawn. Cars jammed in the driveway like a parking lot after a baseball game. Her eyes met mine. She didn't say anything, but her look was enough. She understood. Someone else saw. That steadied me more than anything. If silence is survival, then witness is power. Inside, Daniel had claimed the living room's best chair, perched like a king among subjects. Cousins clustered around him, praising his choice, raising glasses to toast the perfect getaway. One of them said loudly, "Daniel always knows how to host. That's why he's married. You're still single, right, Clara?" Her eyes flicked over me, sharp, dismissive. The heat rose in my face, but I swallowed it whole. Marriage is not a prize, I thought. It's a choice. But in their eyes, my choice or my loss was proof I was lesser. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They mistook stillness for defeat. But stillness is where I keep my blade. I straightened a book on the shelf, folded a stray towel, set a glass upright. Tiny gestures, deliberate cover for the truth. I was memorizing every slight, every theft, every casual cruelty. They had turned my sanctuary into a carnival. They laughed louder than the tide outside, filled my rooms with their noise until the walls themselves seemed to forget me, but I hadn't forgotten. They thought my silence meant I was already erased. They didn't see it was the beginning of my storm. That first night in the house, I barely slept. Their voices drifted through the walls, long after midnight bursts of laughter, a door slamming, the thud of feet on the stairs. I lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, my body rigid on the cushion that was never meant to be a bed. Every sound pressed down on me until the air itself seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here." But it wasn't only the present that kept me awake. It was the past, uncoiling in the dark, reminding me that none of this was new. Daniel had always carried the crown, and I had always been the shadow that made his shine brighter. I saw myself at 12, standing in the school hallway with a paper clenched in my hand. I had worked on that project for weeks, staying up late, copying diagrams by lamplight, asking the teacher questions after class. When the ribbons were handed out, Daniel's project stood at the front of the room. My paper sat untouched at the back. The teacher smiled at him and said, "Brilliant work, Daniel. Your sister must have learned so much from you." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died when she turned, frowning. "Don't make this awkward, Clara. Be quiet, be quiet." I obeyed. That silence followed me home, where our parents sat us down to decide who got which bedroom. Daniel was older, they said. Daniel deserved the larger room. Then my mother turned to me with that familiar phrase, "You don't mind, do you?" It was never a question. It was a sentence, carved into me year after year. "You don't mind, do you?" When he took the better seat at dinner. When he stole the story of how I learned to ride a bike. When relatives praised him for teaching me how to cook, even though I had learned alone with a borrowed recipe book. Every erasure wrapped in those 5 words. And here I was, decades later, lying on a sofa in my own home, listening to Daniel laugh upstairs in the master bedroom I had chosen. For myself, the past wasn't gone. It was alive, strutting across my floors, opening my cabinets, turning my sanctuary into a stage where I was once again the extra. William Faulkner once wrote, "The past is never dead. It's not even past." I felt that truth with every beat of my heart that night. Daniel had never changed. He had only grown older, louder, more entitled. And I had allowed silence to be my shield. But shields, if you hold them too long, become cages. I rolled onto my side, staring at the dim outline of the sliding door. Outside, the ocean moved steady and unbothered. Inside, my family moved unchecked, rewriting my story as if it were theirs to tell. I whispered the old phrase into the dark, not as submission but as accusation. "You don't mind, do you?" My own voice sounded foreign, sharp as broken glass. The memories burned, but they also hardened. For the first time, I felt a shift. I was no longer the child in the hallway, the daughter in the smaller bedroom. I was the woman who had signed the deed. This house was my line in the sand, and if Daniel had crossed it, then the echoes of childhood were no longer enough to silence me. Morning should have brought calm. Instead, it delivered the sound of cereal crunching beneath my bare feet as I stepped into the kitchen. The counters, which had gleamed just days ago, were now buried under half-empty boxes, sticky bowls, and mugs ringed with dried milk. The floor was a patchwork of crumbs, wrappers, and damp towels tossed aside like offerings to chaos. A teenage nephew leaned against the fridge, sipping orange juice straight from the carton. When he saw me, he grinned as if we were conspirators. "Hope you don't mind," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "We're family." That word family had become a knife. I opened the refrigerator and found what little I had stocked for myself already gone. Grapes vanished, bread torn in half, the coffee I brewed yesterday drained into travel mugs I didn't own. My mug, the one I had washed and set aside, was now stained with someone else's lipstick. In the living room, Daniel's voice rose above the din. "People, move the chairs. We'll need space for dinner later. Clara will sort the rest." I froze at the doorway. Clara will sort the rest. 4 words that reduced me from owner to maid. The relatives nodded, dragging my furniture across the floor with a scrape that made my teeth ache. An aunt bustled past, tossing towels into my arms without looking at me. "Could you get these washed? We'll need them dry by tonight." She spoke as though I had been hired for the task. I carried the towels to the laundry room, each step deliberate, each fiber heavy. I had once taught entire classrooms of children to respect themselves. Yet here I was, holding linens like a servant in my own home. When I returned, a cousin gestured to the wall near the hallway. "The kids had some fun," he said lightly. Bright streaks of marker bled across the paint I had chosen, still fresh from the brush. I stepped closer, tracing the damage with my eyes. Hours of work undone in seconds. Before I could speak, Daniel appeared behind me. "Don't overreact. Walls can be repainted. No big deal." He clapped my shoulder, laughing as though he had just told a joke worth repeating. No big deal. I wanted to scream that this house was more than plaster, that it was sacrifice made solid, but my throat closed. I swallowed the words, filing them deep, adding them to the list I kept silently in my head. By evening, humiliation took a sharper turn. I walked into the living room to find Daniel sprawled in my chair. The best one, facing the bay, surrounded by cousins, raising glasses. "Daniel always knows how to host," one of them declared. "That's why he's married. You're still single, right, Clara?" The room laughed, the jab disguised as banter. My face burned, but I kept it still. Marriage, they implied, was a prize. Solitude, a failure. None of them knew that this house was my truest partner, the first place that had chosen me back. I didn't argue. To argue would have been to perform for their amusement. Instead, I nodded once, a gesture so small it nearly disappeared, then turned away. Inside, though, I repeated the truth like a vow. "You will not erase me here." That night, when the house quieted only slightly, I gathered stray shoes from the hall and folded them into the corner, not as surrender, but as observation. Every insult, every theft, every careless dismissal, I filed them all away. They thought I was shrinking. In truth, I was sharpening. By the second morning, the house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a terminal I had accidentally built for their arrivals and departures. Every door swung too often. Every surface bore fingerprints that weren't mine. I stood at the sink with my mug half full of bitter coffee when I heard her voice, low, deliberate, almost tender. My mother. She touched my arm gently, the way she used to when I was small, but the softness of her hand didn't match the weight of her words. "Don't make this awkward, Clara," she whispered. "Let them stay. It's only a few weeks. You'll keep the peace." Keep the peace. As if my silence was the mortar that held this family together. I searched her face for even a flicker of recognition that this was my home, that I had earned it. Instead, I found only wariness, the kind that prefers harmony at any cost, even if the cost is me. "Do you call this peace?" I asked quietly. "They've turned my home into a circus." She sighed, the kind of sigh that carries not empathy but dismissal. "Sometimes keeping harmony is more important than being right." Then she slipped away before I could answer, leaving her sentence behind like a bruise. I stood there, frozen. The betrayal sharper than the insults I'd endured the night before. I had expected my mother to be my shield. Instead, she handed me the blade. Later, my younger sister Mara crouched beside me as I folded blankets in the corner of the living room. For a moment, I thought she had come to help. She leaned close, voice low enough so no one else could hear. "Don't ruin this, Clara. You've always been too rigid. Loosen up, let them enjoy." Rigid. That was her word for boundaries. Her word for a woman who no longer bent until she broke. I studied her face, waiting for a trace of loyalty, but there was none. Just the smooth ease of someone who had chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. I nodded slowly, not in agreement but in resignation. Betrayal from the outside wounds the body, betrayal from the inside cracks the bone. When Daniel passed through the room later, I caught his smirk as he saw me sitting silent. My sister's warning still heavy in my ear. To him, my quiet was confirmation, proof he had me cornered again, just like childhood. But in truth, something else was forming. Loneliness, yes, but not the kind that breaks you, the kind that forges you. Steel settling where trust used to live. That night, when the laughter swelled again and the floors trembled under their stomping, I sat alone in the smallest guest room, pen in hand, writing every offense into a notebook. Not as a diary, not as complaint, as evidence. My family thought they had erased me. What they didn't know was that I had already begun building my case. By the third day, my patience was already a frayed rope, but the morning snapped it clean. I had risen early, hoping to steal a moment of calm before the house awoke. I brewed coffee, sliced a loaf of bread, and laid out a plate of fruit, small comforts I had saved for myself. It was the first breakfast I had planned to enjoy alone. Since they arrived, I carried the plate to the table, the smell of toasted bread soft in the air. I lowered into the chair, fingers curling around the warm mug, when shadows fell across me. A hand darted in grapes plucked from my plate, dropped into Daniel's palm. He chewed loudly, grinning. "Thanks, sis. Always knew you'd take care of us." Before I could respond, another cousin reached across, tearing half the loaf of bread, leaving crumbs scattered like ash. A teenage nephew slid my mug across the table, dumping the coffee into his travel tumbler without a glance. "Perfect. I needed this," he said, already walking away. I stared down at the stripped plate, the fruit gone, the bread torn, the mug empty. My meal erased in less than a minute. A cousin chuckled, patting my shoulder as if I'd played along with some joke. "Guess you're feeding us now." My throat tightened. Feeding them wasn't the wound, it was the way they had taken without asking, as though I had no claim to even the smallest plate in my own home. Daniel leaned back, sipping from a glass, smirking. "Don't glare, it's just food. Lighten up." I didn't glare, I didn't move. My silence must have looked like defeat, but inside, I felt something shift, a heat so sharp it burned cleaner than rage. By afternoon, I climbed the stairs, hoping for a breath in the one space that was still supposed to belong to me, the master bedroom. The door stood open. My suitcase had been shoved against the wall, half unzipped. Clothes I had folded lay crumpled on the floor. Daniel's wife was spreading her dresses across the bed, humming to herself. She turned when she saw me, unbothered, smiling faintly. "Oh, don't look so shocked. You're single. You don't need the best room. The couples deserve it more." Behind her, Daniel appeared in the doorway, dragging his suitcase across my carpet. He didn't flinch. "You'll be fine on the couch, Clara. You always adapt. You've been adapting your whole life." The words struck harder than any slammed door. They weren't just eviction. They were reduction. My life, my sacrifices, diminished to a punchline. I stood there, rooted, fists clenched so tightly my nails cut into my palms. My voice, when it came, was quiet. "It's one thing to be overlooked," I said. "It's another to be evicted from your own space." Daniel laughed, dismissive, and dropped his suitcase on the bed. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a room." I closed the door behind me, walked down the hall, and sat on the sofa they had chosen for me, as if I were a guest in my own house. But something inside me had solidified. Malcolm X's words, half remembered from a book I once underlined, rang clear in my chest. "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." I sat up straighter, my breath steadying. I had been falling for decades. Now I was done. Night settled heavy over the house, but I didn't lie down. The living room echoed with snores and muffled laughter from late-night conversations upstairs. I sat alone at the desk in the smallest guest room, the lamp throwing a pale circle of light across the page. My pen moved steadily, scratching down every trespass as if each word could pin reality into place. I wrote about the food snatched from my plate, the wall stained with marca, the keys taken without permission. I noted Daniel's smirk as he declared I'd adapt, the cousins' laugh as they called me selfish, my mother's whisper that peace mattered more than truth. Each line was a record, not of feelings, but of facts. Evidence. The notebook began to feel heavier than its paper should allow. In another drawer, I kept the folder purchase agreements, mortgage records, bank statements with every payment I had scraped together. I laid them out across the desk like weapons waiting to be drawn. The deed sat on top. My name printed in ink so bold I traced the letters with my finger just to feel them again. In the quiet I practiced. I rehearsed the words I might speak, the calm tone I would use. Not rage. Rage would feed them. Prove their story, that I was dramatic, unstable, selfish. No, I would use clarity like a blade. Paper and ink were sharper than any scream. Often, the floorboards above creaked under their feet. I pictured Daniel laughing in the master bedroom, spreading his clothes across the bed I had chosen. I thought of the child drawing on the wall, of the coffee mug stolen from my hand, of the way they all spoke as if I were invisible. My breath steadied. The pen clicked once in my fingers before I set it down. I wasn't retreating. I was building a case. Silence wasn't defeated, was a ledger. And when the time came, that ledger would cut deeper than anger ever could. I stacked the papers neatly, slid them back into the folder, and closed the drawer with deliberate care. The ocean outside kept its rhythm, in and out, as though reminding me that tides always turn. Tomorrow would come with the same chaos voices echoing through walls. Demands shouted across rooms, but I would no longer meet it as their maid, their scapegoat, their invisible shadow. I would meet it as the owner of this house, armed not with noise but with proof. Dinner that night looked more like a carnival than a meal. The table sagged under the weight of platters and greasy boxers, bottles clinking as they passed from hand to hand. Voices overlapped in waves, laughter, teasing, complaints, each one louder than the last. I sat at the far end, silent, my hands folded in my lap. To anyone watching, I might have seemed small, diminished by the chaos. In truth, I was waiting. I let them fill their plates. I let them toast Daniel, calling him the perfect host, the man who made this gathering possible. I let them jab at me with their barbed smiles, suggesting I should be grateful for the company, that solitude wasn't natural, that I should thank them for bringing life into this house. Each word I swallowed, stacking them inside me like bricks. When the noise reached its peak, folks clattering, chairs scraping, glasses raised high stood. The scrape of my chair against the floor sliced through the room sharper than a shout. Conversations faltered, laughter thinned. I carried the folder in my hands, thick with papers, and walked to the center of the table. Without a word, I dropped it onto the wood. The thud landed like a gavel. Silence spread. This, I said evenly, my voice steady, is not your house. Daniel laughed first, a short, dismissive bark. Oh, come on, Clara, don't ruin the mood. I opened the folder. Deeds, purchase agreements, bank receipts, all of it fanned across the table. The top page bore my name in bold black ink. I tapped it once with my finger. Every dollar, every hour, every sacrifice is here. Mine. Murmurs rippled down the table, forks slipped from hands. A cousin shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Daniel tried again, louder this time. Family doesn't need paperwork. Family shares. I met his eyes, calm as stone. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't erase. You walked into my house, claimed my space, took credit for sacrifices you never made. But paper doesn't lie, and neither do I. From the end of the table, someone whispered, "She's right." Another nodded, avoiding Daniel's gaze. The air cracked, the loyalty he'd always commanded beginning to splinter. Daniel's face darkened. He slammed his palm onto the table, rattling glasses. "You wouldn't dare turn against your own blood." I leaned forward, my voice low but cutting. "Blood doesn't give you the deed. Work does. Discipline does. Respect does. And you showed me none." The room had gone so still I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator beyond the walls. For the first time in days, their eyes were on me, not with mockery, but with something closer to recognition. I reached into the folder one last time and pressed a button on my phone. Daniel's own voice filled the room, tinny but clear. Will be there in 3 hours with 22 people. Make sure you're ready. Gasps broke the silence. The recording played on, every word a nail in the coffin of his authority. When it ended, I let the phone rest beside the papers. This house is not an Airbnb. It is not a family resort. It is mine. And if you stay here, you stay as guests under my rules or you leave tonight. The power shifted in that moment. I felt it like a tide turning. Daniel glared at me, his face twisted with rage, but around him the cousins looked away, ashamed. Even his wife's smile faltered. For the first time since their cars rolled down my drive, I breathed fully, not because I believed the fight was over, but because I had finally drawn the line. The silence that followed my words was thicker than any argument they had thrown at me all week. For the first time, the house didn't ring with their laughter. It rang with unease. Cousins shifted in their chairs, forks resting against plates untouched. Some avoided my eyes, others stared at Daniel, as if waiting for him to reclaim the throne he had always held. He tried, his voice came sharp, brittle. Don't listen to her. She's twisting this. You'll know the truth. This house was bought with family money. Our father's inheritance made it possible. Without him, she'd still be living in a basement. It was the old tech to rewrite the story, bury me under his narrative. But this time, the papers lay spread before them, undeniable, receipts with my name, loan payments, stretching back years, every check signed by me alone, facts staring them down in black ink. One cousin, normally quick to echo Daniel's bravado, cleared his throat. She does have proof. His voice cracked as he said it. Another nodded reluctantly. Maybe we shouldn't have assumed. Daniel's face flushed crimson. He slammed his fist on the table, rattling glasses. You cowards, she's making fools of you. But the cracks had already formed. I saw it in the way his wife lowered her gaze, in the way two cousins whispered to each other, in the way an aunt clutched her glass tighter, embarrassed. His power had always been performance, and now the stage lights were gone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I slid a stack of new papers across the table. These are occupancy agreements. If you want to stay, you sign acknowledging you are guests. Guests with limits. Guests who pay. Or you pack tonight. The uproar was immediate. Contracts with family. One cousin scoffed. This is insane. Sign or leave, I replied evenly. Those are the only options. The tension snapped into arguments not directed at me, but at each other. One cousin stood quickly, muttering that it wasn't worth the fight, urging his wife to pack. Another shot back, insisting I owed them more. Within minutes, the unity that had filled my home like a storm had turned inward, splintering. Daniel stormed out to the porch, his voice booming into the night. She can't do this. This is ours too. His declaration carried across the yard and into the ears of neighbors who had gathered quietly at the edge of their lawns. Curious, after nights of noise and overflowing driveways, Mrs. Evans, steady as stone, stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but it cut like a blade. No, Daniel. Everyone here knows the truth. This house belongs to Clara alone. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, shame spreading faster than his lies ever had. His face twisted, cornered not by me, but by the community he had tried to impress. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Watching. Public exposure was sharper than private confrontation, and I knew the sting of it would linger long after he left. In neighborhoods like this, reputation is currency, and his was bankrupt now. By midnight, the house was in shambles, not from their noise, but from their retreat. Bags were dragged down the stairs, doors slammed, trunks stuffed with clothes. Some left without a word, others muttered curses under their breath, but none met my eyes. Daniel lingered the longest, glaring at me as though his stare alone could undo what had just happened. But there was nothing he could do. His empire of entitlement had collapsed. One signature, one whisper, one neighbor's voice at a time. I closed the door behind the last of them, the lock clicking in place with a finality that felt like breath returning to lungs after being held too long. The house was silent again, not empty, not broken, but waiting. The morning after their departure, the silence felt unnatural. It wasn't the comforting hush I had dreamed of when I bought this place. It was heavy, weighted, like the house itself was holding its breath. I walked slowly down the hallway, each step landing in echoes of what had been a cousin's laughter ricocheting off the walls. Children thundering across the stairs, Daniel's voice booming like he owned every board and nail. Now all of that was gone, leaving behind only debris. Sheets were crumpled on the beds, damp with sweat and sunblock. Towels were heaped in corners, sour with mildew. In the kitchen, counters were sticky with juice spills. Bread crusts hardened into the wood grain, and a stack of broken plates sat crooked in the sink. The refrigerator smelled of leftovers I didn't buy. I picked up a mug and turned it over in my hand. The handle was chipped. It wasn't an antique, but it had been mine, part of the small set I'd chosen with care. Now it was another casualty. I set it back down gently, as though tenderness could undo the crack. The damage wasn't only in objects. It was in the walls where marker lines still bled faintly through the paint, in the carpet snagged by careless shoes, in the dent left in the frame of the door where someone had slammed it too hard. Each scar whispered the same truth. My sanctuary had been treated like a rental, my sacrifices trampled as if they were disposable. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes. Relief and grief braided together inside me. Relief that the noise was gone, that the invasion had ended. Grief that it had come to this, at all that family could leave such wreckage, not just in wood and stone, but in blood and trust. By midday, I drove into town and returned with new locks. I carried the box into the house and set it on the counter like an offering. Installing them took less than an hour, but each click of the bolt sliding into place was louder, stronger, more final than their laughter had ever been. With every turn of the screwdriver, I thought, this is mine, not Daniel's, not theirs. Mine. When the last lock was in place, I stood at the doorway, keys cool in my palm. They had called me selfish for drawing boundaries, but selfishness doesn't build a home. Discipline does. I whispered it aloud, as though the house itself needed to hear it. Later, while cleaning, I found a folded note left on the counter. The handwriting was Daniel's. Just 5 words. You made this ugly. I read it twice, the old ache stirring for a moment. Years ago, that sentence would have undone me, would have sent me chasing his approval like a shadow chasing its source. Now it only confirmed what I already knew. He had lost control. His narrative had cracked. I set the note gently into the trash and whispered, "No, Daniel, I made it mine." That evening, I lit a candle in the living room, the scent of lavender filling the air, masking the remnants of their chaos. I sat in the chair by the window, the one Daniel had claimed as his throne, and faced the bay. The horizon burned orange as the sun sank, steady and indifferent, carrying away the noise of the week. The house was scarred, yes, but scars are proof of survival. And survival was the truest inheritance I had ever earned. In the days that followed, the silence became something new. No longer heavy with aftermath, it settled into the kind of quiet that allows a person to breathe again. Each morning I walked through the house with a mug of coffee, touching the walls, opening the windows, reclaiming every room they had tried to erase me from. The lemon scent of polish replaced the stench of fast food. Fresh sheets covered the beds. The sound of the ocean returned as the dominant voice, steady and unbuffeted, reminding me that peace is not loud, it is deliberate. But closure is never only about scrubbing floors or changing locks. It is about drawing lines no one else can cross again. One afternoon, I sat across from my lawyer in town, the familiar folder between us. "I want the deed updated," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Update how?" I slid a page forward. No inheritance without demonstrated respect. No entitlement disguised as family. If they want a claim one day, they'll need to show proof of honor first. He leaned back, studying me with a faint smile. "You've built a wall no one can climb without earning it." "That's the point," I said. "This isn't vengeance. It's structure. It's survival." That night, I received an email from Daniel. Just one line, "You made this ugly." For a moment I stared at it, feeling the old ache tug at me. Then I typed 5 words in reply and pressed send. No, I made it mine. Rebirth rarely comes with fireworks. It comes with small moments of clarity, like sitting on the porch at dusk with a candle flickering beside me, the bay stretching out in calm shades of violet and gold. It comes with realizing that solitude is not emptiness, is space. It comes with knowing that boundaries are not selfishness, they are self-respect. I sat there long after the sun dipped below the horizon, the sound of the waves steady against the shore. The house was whole again, not because it was untouched, but because it was finally defended. They had left carrying shame. I had stayed with everything that mattered. Sometimes survival doesn't look like a fight in the street. Sometimes it looks like a quiet porch, a locked door, and the courage to finally say no more. This house wasn't just wood and stone, it became proof that dignity is worth defending, even when it costs you family. If this story struck you, if you've ever had to draw your own lines and stand behind them, don't leave just yet. Hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that dive deep into the drama of family, loyalty, and self-respect. Your support helps keep these stories alive.